every morning at 6:47 a.m., before the alarm on his phone went off at 6:50, before the coffee maker started its cycle at 7:01, before any of the carefully structured machinery of his day began its operation, Owen Garrett stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his apartment in Indianapolis, Indiana, and practiced smiling, not because he was vain, not because he was an actor preparing for a role, not because there was anything wrong with his face that required correction. He practiced because somewhere, in the last 4 years, he had lost the ability to do it naturally, and he had discovered the way you discover things about yourself that you would prefer not to know, that if he didn't practice, the smile that appeared on his face in social situations had a quality that he could see in photographs afterward, a tightness around the eyes, and a slight miscalibration in the timing that made it look like what it was, which was a smile that had been assembled rather than arrived at. He practiced for approximately 3 minutes. He tried different versions, a warm, professional, casual, the specific one he used when a colleague said something that wasn't funny but required acknowledgement. He had names for them in his head, a private taxonomy of expressions that he had developed over the years of needing to produce them on demand. He was 36 years old, and he had been doing this for 4 years, and nobody knew. Owen worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in downtown Indianapolis. He was good at his job in the way that people are good at things that suit their particular wiring, detail-oriented, patient with numbers, capable of holding large amounts of data in his head simultaneously and finding the patterns in it that other people missed. His colleagues respected him. His boss, a man named Gerald, who communicated primarily through approving nods and the absence of critical feedback, had given him 3 consecutive strong performance reviews. He was, by every professional measure available, doing well. He ate lunch alone most days. Not always. Sometimes a colleague named Patricia would ask if he was coming to the group lunch, and he would go, and he would deploy the appropriate smile for the appropriate moments and contribute the appropriate amount to the conversation and come back to his desk feeling more tired than he had when he left. Tiring was not the right word. Exactly, depleted, like a phone that has been running too many applications simultaneously and has dropped from 80% to 40% in the span of an hour. He had been this way, he thought, since his late 20s, or perhaps he had always been this way, and his late 20s were simply when he noticed. There had been a relationship with a woman named Jess, 2 years, genuinely good in many ways, and that had ended not dramatically but with Jess saying, on a quiet Sunday evening, that she felt like she was always slightly on the outside of him. That no matter how close she got, there was a last few inches she couldn't cross. She had said it without cruelty, which somehow made it more difficult to argue with. Owen had said that wasn't true and then sat with it for 3 weeks and understood that it was. After Jess, he had dated occasionally, and briefly, and each time arrived at the same last few inches and watched the other person figure it out with the specific sequence of confusion, then effort, then the quiet acceptance of someone who has stopped trying to reach something they cannot reach. He was not unhappy exactly. That was the complicated part. He had a life that worked. He had his apartment, which he kept clean and had furnished with care. He had 3 friends from college who texted in a group chat and met for dinner twice, a year when schedules aligned. He had running, which he did 5 mornings a week, and which was the one activity in his life that required nothing from him, socially, and in which his body could simply move through space without performing anything for anyone. He had books, many books, the accumulated proof of a person who was more comfortable with interior worlds than exterior ones. He was not unhappy. He was just behind glass. The same glass that Jess had identified. The same last few inches, present everywhere in his life, fully connected to nothing in it. The mirror practice had started as a practical solution to a practical problem. He had noticed the miscalibration in a work photograph and had spent 2 weeks correcting it with the same methodical approach he applied to everything else. And then he had kept doing it morning after morning. And somewhere in the keeping doing it had understood that the problem was not his smile. The smile was just the visible edge of something much larger that he had been managing so efficiently for so long that he had stopped being able to see it clearly. The thing that changed was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday in October when Owen's running route took him past a community center he had passed 1,000 times without looking at it, and on this particular Tuesday there was a sign outside that said, in plain black letters on a whiteboard, Depression Support Group, Wednesdays 7 p.m., all welcome. He ran past it. He ran another quarter mile and then stopped on the sidewalk, which was something he never did mid-run, and stood there breathing and looking at the middle distance for approximately 45 seconds. Then he turned around and ran back and took a photograph of the sign with his phone. He did not go the following Wednesday. He went the Wednesday after that, arriving 8 minutes late, because he had sat in his car in the parking lot for 22 minutes, arguing with himself, and he slipped into the back of a room where 11 other people sat in a circle of folding chairs under fluorescent lights, and he chose a seat and sat in it and said almost nothing for the entire hour. But he came back the following week, and the one after that. The group was facilitated by a man named Dr. Carl Patterson, who was in his late 50s and had the particular quality of someone who has spent decades in a room with people who are struggling and has developed, through that proximity, a complete absence of the discomfort that most people feel around pain. He did not rush silences. He did not offer solutions. He asked questions that were simple on the surface and opened into something much larger if you followed them honestly. In Owen's third week, during a go-around where each person said something about their week, Owen said, for the first time to any group of people, any person except himself, I practice smiling in the mirror every morning before work. He said it matter-of-factly the way he said most things without dramatic build-up. There was a brief silence in the room. A woman named Beverly, who was in her mid-40s and had been coming to the group for 8 months, said why. Because the natural version stopped working, Owen said. 4 years ago. I don't know exactly when. I just noticed one day that what appeared on my face in photographs looked like something I had built, rather than something I felt. The room was quiet for a moment. A man named Derek, who sat across the circle and rarely spoke, said, I do something similar. Mine is laughing. I practice the timing. Owen looked at him. 37 years old accountant Owen knew from previous weeks. He had assumed without thinking about it that he was the only person who did this specific thing. The assumption collapsed quietly. What would happen? Dr. Patterson asked. Not to anyone in particular, if you didn't practice. Owen thought about this. People would see, he said. See what? That he stopped. Found the word. Effortful. That being here costs something. That I'm not. Another stop. That I'm working harder than it looks. The room was very quiet. That's not something to hide, Beverly said. Not as advice, just as a statement of fact. Owen looked at her. I know, he said. I hide it anyway. He did not transform. That would be the wrong word and the wrong story. He went to the group every Wednesday for 4 months, and he talked more as the weeks passed and listened more carefully than he had listened to anything in years, and understood incrementally things about himself that he had been managing around rather than looking at directly. He understood that the glass he felt behind was not a character flaw or a permanent condition, but a symptom of something that had a name and a treatment and a community of people who sat in folding chairs under fluorescent lights and said true things about themselves without performing wellness. He saw a therapist. Dr. Patterson had a referral list, a woman named Dr. Susan Hale, who had an office in Midtown with plants on every surface, and who asked him, in their first session, to describe a moment when the glass had not been there. He had to think for a long time. Then he described running and the specific feeling of his body moving through space in the early morning, the way his mind went quiet and something underneath the management surfaced. Briefly, Dr. Hale had written something and said, so it's there. The feeling. It just needs conditions where the performance isn't required. Owen had sat with that for a week. He started telling people small true things, not large disclosures, and he was not built for large disclosures. And Dr. Hale had told him that was not a requirement, small ones. He told Patricia at work, when she asked how he was doing on a Monday morning, that he had had a hard weekend instead of fine. Just that, a hard weekend. And Patricia had paused in the way people pause when they receive something real instead of the expected answer, and said, "Me too, honestly." And they had talked for 4 minutes in the hallway, outside their offices, and Owen had gone back to his desk feeling, for the first time in a long time, like someone who had been in actual contact with another person. He called Jess once, not to reopen anything. He was clear with himself and with Dr. Hale about this. He called because she had told him a true thing about himself, at a time when he couldn't hear it, and he had thought about her honesty with a gratitude he had never expressed. She answered, was warm, was clearly in a different chapter of her life. She mentioned someone named Marcus with the casual frequency of a person for whom that name is a permanent fixture. He told her simply that she had been right about the last few inches and that he was working on it. She said, "I'm glad." "Oh, and I really am." They talked for 12 minutes and said goodbye, with the specific warmth of two people who cared for each other in the past. Tense without regret. One morning in February, a Tuesday, early, 6:47 a.m., Owen stood in front of his bathroom mirror. He looked at himself for a moment. Then he smiled. It was not perfect. It was not the precisely calibrated expression he had spent 4 years assembling in this mirror. It was slightly asymmetrical and arrived a half-second before he expected it, and had something in the eyes that the practiced version had never quite managed. It was his. He stood in the mirror for a moment longer than usual, not practicing, just looking at the face of a man who had spent 4 years building a version of himself that could move through the world without showing the seams, and who was learning slowly, imperfectly in Wednesday evening, circles in therapy offices and 4-minute hallway conversations, that the seams were not the problem. The seams were just the evidence of having been put back together, which required having come apart, which was not failure, which was just being a person. He turned off the bathroom light and went to make coffee. He did not practice that morning. He did not practice the morning after that either. By March, he had stopped counting the mornings. By April, the mirror was just a mirror again in the place where he checked that his tie was straight and his hair was reasonable, and that the man looking back at him was present, genuinely present, in a way that had nothing to do with calibration. He went to the Wednesday group still. Not because he needed it the way he had needed it in October, because Beverly was there, and Derek, and 6 other people who told true things about themselves under fluorescent lights, and being in that room reminded him weekly that the cost of being here, the effort of it, the working harder than it looks, was not something to hide from the world. It was the most honest thing about him, and honesty, he had learned, does not require practice. It just requires the willingness to let the mirror show you what is actually there.